Всем привет, с вами Монокатарий. Посмотрим игрушку Брайт Пау. В общем, что-то там про котика. Так, давайте начнем. Она опять на английском. Так, а что такое?
Oh, there you are, Theo. Honestly, it's your own dream. Do you even know where you are? Ah, well, it's time we got you sorted out with these cards. Come on now, we haven't got all day.
Так, что такое? Так.
Oh, sorry about that. Just give that rewind button a tap and we'll see if we can't start walking around things instead of
Мы
into them.
сбежали, да?
If you ever find
Ага,
yourself
это
in a
можно
pickle, just remember that you can take
отмотать
a step
назад.
back and try something else. Now, give these a whirl and see where they get you.
Так, а нам нужно дойти до туда, да? Так. Я не могу покрутить камеру. Во. Теперь крутит наконец-то. Так. Угу.
There you go. Remember, Theo, you can look around at any time.
Так сильно крутит камеру,
What's that just
конечно.
there? Maybe you should give it a peek.
Так. Что нужно посмотреть-то? Тихо. Так, какой-то бокс.
I wonder what that's doing sitting around here. Maybe you should keep your eyes open for other interesting things. You never know what you'll find. Well, we're done here. Go on, leap into your family's arms. Lauren and Nathaniel are waiting.
Так. Так, мордор это что у нас? Смерть? Убийство что? Ой, божечки, какой котик. Так, это у нас лежанка.
What was that? Oh, okay.
Да блин.
Well, after being
Тебя
woken
неудобно. Какое-то
unceremoniously
письмо.
by a sudden noise, our hero Theo felt that if he was to be kept awake, he deserved to know why.
Так, фотография. Жалко, она на английском, ну, непонятно, что они там говорят. Так.
Hearing the yelling from the kitchen, Theo
Так,
wondered if he
вещи
had really
человека.
moved from his bed just to listen to some tiff.
Пианино. Фотография. Это, наверное, фотография нашего хозяина. Ой, да что-то случилось.
Perhaps things were a little more serious than he'd thought. The kitchen seemed normal.
Ой, тут правда убили.
What was that? He could see across the room. He had to take a closer look.
Наша мисочка. Что тут еще можно посмотреть? Тихо. Блин, как же неудобно. Фотография. Так. Вот наш еще. Да, еще фотография. Что тут ужасное случилось? Как же наша кисточка?
God. Theo couldn't believe what he was seeing. His family, motionless on the floor. But that was it. No gun? Nothing at all. Was someone else here? As he turned away, Theo could only think about one thing. Someone was surely responsible for this, and he had to know who.
Да, очень не хватает русского языка.
Cautiously examining the hallway, Theo
Часы.
saw no signs of the killer. Instead, he found a path of destruction carved through strange machines before him.
Это робот.
The deeper into the room Theo moved, the more he realized that something was amiss. That bright red light hadn't always been there, had it?
Ух ты!
Although he could not shake the image of his departed owners, Theo suddenly found himself somewhere very different indeed. However,
Нужно
before he
как-то
could
пройти
appreciate his
теперь.
new surroundings, he found his attention drawn to the glowing hot wall of energy in front of him. Faced with something so clearly hazardous, he thought it might be wise to take a moment to think before diving headlong into oblivion.
Так. Ой! Так, мы не можем пройти. Это понятно. Так, как теперь тогда тут пройти? Угу.
Oh, what a pleasant surprise! After his daring maneuver, Theo found that he was still alive. Clearly, Theo didn't have time to mess about with a killer on the loose.
Ничего себе,
Perhaps
тут
that
даже
vent
котик
offered a
может
way
умереть.
forward. Still somewhat tense from his previous trial, Theo was immensely relieved
Так, какой-то...
to find no deadly lasers when he
Борщик.
emerged from the vent. On the other hand, he was instead faced with a functional, frantic, and quite soggy security robot.
Как же неудобно на геймпаде-то играть.
As he skirted by the distracted
Ага.
machine, Theo found himself eyeing the
Все,
hallway of
поняла, он
the
тут
aquarium.
катается,
Either someone
мешает
was
нам.
stalking the halls, shooting at water features, or the security needed to work on their aim. Though the appeal of fresh fish was enticing, it was offset by the risk of an unexpected bath. Rather than contemplate such a terrible fate any further, Theo decided to make a quick exit. Advancing cautiously, Theo was
Так,
encouraged
нам
by
тут
the
сразу
sight of another
показывает, что у
aquarium.
нас 6 этих
This time with the water
карточек.
safely inside, not threatening to unpleasantly dampen his fur.
Ой, статуэтка кошечки.
There was no time to fish, however, as security appeared to be taking its job a touch more seriously.
Так, смотрим, он у нас тоже, да, катается, так что надо как-то туда обходить все это.
Tearing Turning his attention away from the unattainable, Theo delicately stepped between the broken remains of some very expensive-looking
Ага,
showpieces.
подождите, нет. Так,
Despite his lack of any understanding of fine art, he was disgusted by the wanton destruction before him. Having successfully weaved past the searching eyes of the guard, he was overjoyed to see that he could just follow the killer through a door, instead of crawling through the ventilation like a rodent.
очень интересно. И я просто сюжета не понимаю, что к чему, но
Theo cast his eyes about the grandiose
все
room.
очень круто
The
выглядит.
impressive decor marred by the smoking wreckage of robotic guards. Clearly,
Ресепшн.
someone with no respect for interior
Ты тут что-то с животными
design
делаешь?
had been this way.
Ой,
However,
блин, опять?
hanging over the remains of a reception desk, Theo spotted something that took his interest. Bright Paw Industries.
Так, а как тут теперь?
Despite the damage, the underlying class of this
Отлично.
Bright Paw establishment was.
В смысле включилась?
Despite
А,
the
она не до
damage, the
конца
underlying class of this
исчезла.
Bright Paw establishment was clear. The placement of several large aquariums, brimming with exotic fish, was an inspired design choice that Theo could respect. Theo crossed the room, breathing in the intoxicating fragrance of
Ой.
fish, while taking care to avoid the
Нет,
remaining hazards.
что-то...
As he did, his mind began to wander. Why was a place like this situated beneath his home? And more importantly, why had these fishy treats not been brought to his attention before? At first glance, it appeared that Theo had stumbled into a storage room for broken glass. Except there were other items in the glittering
Патруль
fragments.
робот.
Grenades, missiles, an umbrella.
Какая-то ракета. Так, тут будут ездить роботы, да? Так, вот проехал. Я думаю, нам лучше за ним идти. Так он нас точно не цапнет.
A hidden underground facility, robotic security, and now rooms filled with odd weapons. What on earth was this place? Looking back, Theo considered that it was perhaps unwise to leave such destructive toys lying around. On the other hand, there was no way someone would leave live explosives on display. Probably best to ignore it and hurry on. Theo contemplated
Так,
the
высунул
ruins of the once
карточку.
magnificent boardroom, which had been reduced to little more than burnt mahogany by some kind of explosion.
Какая-то граната, что?
Apparently, the killer had needed to clear the room in a hurry. But why? Oh, perhaps those lasers were a motivator. With the wall of death slowly advancing, Theo
Ох ты ж,
scrambled for a
нихрена
plan to
себе.
slip by. There, across the room, a shattered glass wall offering a glimpse of escape.
Где моя штучка-то? А. Подождите-ка.
Deftly avoiding glass with his paws,
Всё,
Theo found
нужно
his eyes
успеть
drawn to a
пройти.
large portrait on the wall. Was that
Во.
Nathaniel?
Даже не надо
Understood,
было
he
время
wondered.
использовать.
How much of all this was his master responsible for?
Интересно,
Someone had clearly been
сколько
rifling-
здесь актов? Здесь не написано. А, ну тут можно было другую расцветки кисы выбрать, что ли? А, тут после третьего открывается акта. Так, вот четвертый, пятый. Мне просто интересно, сколько здесь актов. Ничего себе этот. Девять актов, да? Да, у нас теперь будет такая киса бегать. Ага. Расцветки карт можно выбирать. Коллекция. Это вот то, что я нахожу, да? Понятно.
through the deliveries recently, though they didn't
Да, у
seem to have
нас
found what
киса
they were looking
изменилась.
for.
Так, давайте еще один уровень пройдем. Блин, интересная игра.
Obviously, the killer had been looting the facility, and it was unlikely that they planned to use volatile weaponry to spread peace and joy. Being a conscientious cat, Theo knew it fell to him to put a stop to the killer's nefarious activities. Finding himself inside a warehouse, the towering stacks of crates gave Theo some measure of hope. Perhaps the killer would try to search the top of an unstable pile and fall to their doom.
Так, как нам бы... Ой, тихо.
Lost in daydreams of the killer
Ah!
being buried alive, Theo
Нифига
stepped
себе.
blindly forwards onto a conveyor belt, promptly shuffling him away from his happy thoughts.
Так, нет, так, что назад. Ну-ка. Отлично.
Perhaps it was unlikely that the killer would be ended by fallen cargo, but the belts leading into the dark and deadly machinery seemed to promise an untimely demise. Spotting a bundle under some nearby crates, it appeared Theo's
Так,
wishes
тут
had been
опять
heard.
дайте двигаться.
However, he tempered his excitement until he could get a closer look.
Так, они у нас катаются.
Stepping over a broken belt with great care, he was disappointed to discover not a body, but simply several empty crates bearing the label High Explosive.
Тоже не так. Как нам? Так, а как нам кота развернуть? Вот в чем вопрос. Ну, допустим.
The empty crates led Theo to conclude three things. The killer had found what they were looking for, they were definitely
Во.
up to something, and
Прошли.
Theo's work was not yet done. He moved on with the hope that the killer's loot would be enough to slow them down.
Так,
Theo
блин,
pondered
тут
the
опять
erratic
лазеры.
crusade of the robots as they fired at non-existent
Лазербот.
threats. Perhaps the killer had just passed through?
Блин, это не есть хорошо, эти лазерботы. О. котик нарисован. Так. Нам нужно как-то пройти.
The belt, unable to
Ага.
tell the difference between a cat and a crate, and
Всё,
lacking the desire
поняла.
to learn, moved him once again as it would any other box.
А! Ладно, должны успеть пройти.
As he headed for the door, Theo couldn't
Отлично.
shake the feeling that the strange blue algae was creeping steadily across the wall behind him. Oh well, it was probably harmless.
Зачем какие-то лазеры тут стоят? Что вообще произошло? Это роботы убили этих людей? Это, наверное,
Whoever Theo
блин,
was
опять
following had
лазеры.
certainly spooked these poor robots who were all consumed by blind panic.
Так, тут у нас... Он будет вместе с нами, да, кататься? Угу. Так, нет, тогда...
As he carefully padded forwards, avoiding lasers, Theo noticed a most
Hee-hee.
curious drawing etched into the wall. But why would a killer stop to doodle? Theo couldn't stop thinking about the bizarre graffiti he kept seeing. It was unlikely the killer was
Wah.
taking the time for
Honestly.
artistic creativity. Was someone else in the facility? As he stepped into the room, Theo found his
Вандализм.
racing mind
Куда?
halted by yet another drawing of a
Что это все за
slightly more significant scale.
рисунки? Подождите, оружие.
Theo tried his best to examine the etching, but found it devoid of artistic value.
Где я посмотрела, где у нас еще? Третье. Да блин. Вообще неудобно. В геймпаде переключать.
A for effort, he supposed.
Так тут сколько было так? Как можно посмотреть? А, вот как можно переключаться. Подождите. А что за РБ? Так, а правда, где еще одна штука? Вроде 4 было написано. Как вот посмотреть вот это что? Так, это пауза. Интересно. Блин, я просто не помню, там 2 высветилось или 3, но вроде больше ничего тут не светится. А вот это уже я не могу посмотреть их. Да? Наверное, было 3. Все, она уже не активна, то, что я посмотрела. Что она светится. Так. Ладно, давайте попробуем в этом... Да блин, не ту кнопку нажимаю. В этом режиме пройти. Так, у нас лазер. У нас лазер. И нам нужно... куда-то пройти, допустим. Угу. Нет, да. Если я так пойду, меня сейчас убьет тут. Да. Так, подождите, если вот так, но вот так сделать.
As he began to move away, Theo couldn't help but wonder who would put so much effort into these acts of vandalism. Was it maybe some kind of poorly drawn calling card? Perhaps, he thought as he carried on, the murderer was simply an awful artist. Whatever it was, the mural failed to hold Theo's interest long enough for any meaning to be gleaned.
Так, вот так.
According to the booming sounds of heavy industry and the massive shipping containers, Theo had found himself in some kind of loading station.
Так, где-то что еще светится? Галстук. Так, тут контейнеры будут у нас ездить, да?
Theo's eye was caught by something colourful and clearly out of place hanging from a rail across the room. A discarded tie. Was this some kind of taunt? It was becoming clear to Theo that the large boxes wouldn't just wait for him to cross, so he quickened his pace towards the infuriating clue. Clearly the killer had left this tie to send a message, but in doing so they had left a trail
Да
for
давай
Theo to follow.
быстрее, болтаешь.
Perhaps he'd get the better of them yet. Though he was intrigued by the surprisingly expressive train waiting before him, on the other side of the tracks, a curious hole in the wall drew his eye. Perhaps the killer had made their own exit.
Так, это у нас тоже будет ездить, да? Или нет?
Stepping onto the train, Theo glanced towards his goal and noticed a strangely carefree-looking robot bumbling around near a control panel. Hopefully this one wasn't a threat. The train began to quake, and Theo couldn't react fast enough to leap off. He had better find something to hold on to.
Что-то не так сделала? Ох ты ж, ни хрена, подождите.
Theo was quite unprepared for the sudden velocity and found his current predicament extremely upsetting. Luckily, he just needed to hold on until the train looped back to the station.
Так, подождите, где тут что еще можно найти? Что дальше? Так, ладно, погнали. Блин, мне надо, значит, все-таки пройти. Нет, так не получится. Блин. Да не кричи, сейчас пройдем. Здесь еще одна штука-то. Так. Подождите, ну-ка. Назад. Так, тогда сюда перебегаем. Нам лучше, наверное, завернуть. же-то сложно-то тут. Ага, подожди. Подождите. Так. Пробегаем. Нам теперь надо сюда. А, что это? Непонятный робот. Да не кричи, так сейчас пройдем. Пишешь. Так, листим назад. Еще назад. Блин, мне так вибрирует геймпад этого поезда. Ух, успели. А, у меня же руки сейчас сами вибрируют от этого.
Theo staggered off the train quickly, driven by his newfound appreciation.
Так, нам куда? Это мы целый круг проехали. Мы же с этой начинали.
Just ahead of him, he could see that bloody robot that had
Опять этот робот.
in the first place.
Иди отсюда. Ты уже настучал тут.
As he followed the irritating machine through the jagged opening in the wall, Theo hoped that he wouldn't ever have to lay eyes on it again.
Блин, интересная игра, правда. Вот еще бы понимать, что нам рассказывает рассказчик. Но так вот в плане геймплея вообще прям очень интересно. Давайте тогда на этом закончим. Я не знаю, может быть, я ее пройду. Если там всего 9 актов, то, возможно, пройду. Посмотрим. Надо, в общем, подумать. А на этом все. Всем спасибо за просмотр. Не забывайте подписываться, ставить лайки, оставлять комментарии, нажимать колокольчик. С вами была Монокатари. Увидимся в других играх. Всем пока.